Okay, we're going to get started. Thanks for coming, everyone. Just a few announcements before I ask John Rosenblatt to come up to introduce Sloane. As you can see, we're lit for a film shoot, and this is part of our digital filmmaking practicum and the beginning of the seeds of the film program that we're launching this summer. Also, good news from the theater and film department. Mercedes Rule has signed on as a staff acting teacher, and we're going to begin to develop a certificate in acting. The next reading here will not be a reading, but will be, in fact, the master class with Christine Vachon of Killer Films and Pamela Koffler, and that will be on March 23rd, a full Saturday. And then the reading following that will be 3 student publications. Judy Mandel, Victor Giannini, and Michael Locurto each have published their first books, and they'll be reading on the 25th. And now I want to introduce John Rosenblatt, who I think of as the Ellen DeGeneres of our writing program, because I don't know if you guys were around when 9/11 happened, but Ellen DeGeneres had to keep almost hosting the Emmy Awards, and it got canceled time and time again. Well, the same thing has happened with John, who's about to introduce Sloane. So please welcome John Rosenblatt.
It's been 3 months in the making. She baked a cookie in her boss' likeness and presented it to her as a gift. She had a neighbor who tried to dig his way to China. She locked herself out of her apartment twice in the same day, 2 apartments actually, her old one and her new one. She had a first boss who hurled a book at her head. She has been called the voice of her generation. She is Sloane Crosley. To be called witty and to actually be witty are 2 entirely different things. Sloane Crosley is hilarious. In her New York Times best-selling collection of humorous personal essays, I Was Told There'd Be Cake and How Did You Get This Number, Sloane's charming and observant writing makes the personal relatable, making you, the reader, feel like her best friend. Her series of misadventures navigating New York City in her post-grad 20s, from her first job to the perils of moving apartments to tyrannical bosses to being the bridesmaid of a woman she hadn't seen in 10 years, Sloane captures the travails of youth and urban life in her own wry, original, genuine, and self-deprecating way, making the mundane wildly funny. I Was Told There'd Be Cake was a finalist for the James Thurber Award for American Humor. In How Did You Get This Number, Sloane ventures to Alaska, Paris, Lisbon, and Portugal, where she naturally encounters Portuguese circus clowns, witnesses a Bear Cub assassination, and gets exiled from Notre Dame. Her style is natural and genuine, her insight sharp and thought-provoking, her predicaments all too real and painfully funny. Sloane is a frequent contributor to the New York Times, GQ, and NPR, and has also written for The Observer, Elle, Salon, Esquire, Black Book, and Playboy, among other publications. Sloane is the editor of the Best American Travel Writing 2011, and her ebook, Up the Down Volcano, recounts her ill-advised attempt to climb one of the tallest mountains in the world. Sloane's widely acclaimed work has been compared to that of David Sedaris and Sarah Vowell, and she's been likened to a modern-day Dorothy Parker. Sloane also wrote the cover story for the worst-selling issue in Maxim's history. Sloane writes, teaches, and lives in New York City. Ladies and gentlemen, Sloane Crosley.
Thank you. That's the nicest introduction I think I've ever had for anything. And you're not even related to me. So thank you. Okay, well, I always think that people kind of want to hear reading, and this makes a loud noise, huh? It'll be good for the filmmaking class. So I always think people kind of want to hear reading and mostly want to hear people chatter and read on their own time. So I'm going to read probably about 10 or 15 minutes, and this should be an interesting experiment because I'm going to read a piece of an essay. Can you all hear me, by the way? Okay, cool. So this is a piece of an essay called Light Pollution, which is in the second book, How Did You Get This Number? And I'm going to start a little bit in. I don't think you need to know much except for the fact that I am in a car that is kind of like an SUV, and I'm in Alaska. Only a few days in, and nothing surprises me about Alaska. It is a land of casual extremes, a place located not only on the fringes of the planet, but on the fringes of all normalcy. A place where you could wake up one morning to a caribou giving birth in your backyard, and you'd go to work anyway. You're not even sure where your camera is. Life is both worshipped and expendable in equal doses, and the human population is as serious as the scenery. Here is a list of the 6 types of Alaskan residents, not including native tribes. 1, military personnel. 2, state builders. 3, nature enthusiasts, by which I mean raw, in-your-face nature. Bird watching is for house cats. 4, hippie nutballs who looked at Portland, Oregon and thought, this is way too urban, I have to get out of here. 5, people who have at one point done something very illegal involving a sawed-off shotgun and freezer bags. 6, this guy. When I boarded my flight to Anchorage in Chicago, I went to wedge my trashy magazines into the polyester pouch in front of me. There was something more substantial in there than usual between the Sky Mall catalog and the safety card. It was a library book. I was intrigued. It felt like finding an abandoned toy in a random bathroom stall, but less creepy. I let the pocket snap shut before opening it again. On the spine, in big bold letters, it read, "The Amityville Horror, a True Story." Nope, just as creepy. Passengers were still streaming down the aisle, clutching their boarding passes and looking above the seats as if trying to remember the alphabet. I quickly shoved the book back into the pouch to my right and tried to forget about it. My seatmate turned out to be a state builder Alaskan. His grandfather had a small bay named after him. He was on his way home to visit his mother, who made custom-made shotgun cases. She does not. Well, no, he looked at me thoughtfully. She doesn't make the cases themselves, but you should see what she does with them. I imagine this man's mother in a floral muumuu beating the shit out of a sea otter on the front porch. Apparently, what she actually does is decorate the cases. Causing no small amount of pride in her son, she was recently commissioned to make one for a Jerry Falwell-like figure I should have heard of, but haven't. At the base, she crazy glued a bleeding crucifix of red rhinestones and her logo, A Case of Class by Melina. He handed me her card. "I'm Earl," he said, stiffly shaking my hand in such close proximity to his chest it gave the illusion of palsy. "Sloane," I shook back, trying on the less you talk, harder you are theory of man-speak. "Is this your first time going to Alaska?" asked Earl. "It is. Well, she's a beauty. She prettier than a boat?" Earl said nothing. He opened his pouch, took one look at the Amityville Horror, shrugged, and saw it as a repository for chewing gum. "Prettier," he said, "but she has a dark side. Weird stuff goes down in Alaska, and I don't think people think of the state like that." "That's more or less exactly how they think of it," I said, and proceeded to index every axe murderer I knew on my fingers. "So, Earl, you can see how the stories become geographically dense and objectively creepier as you move further north and west." "I guess so," he frowned thoughtfully. "Now that you mention it." Earl proceeded to tell me about a murder case in which a bakery owner was making brioche by day and picking up strippers at a club near the airport by night. This particular baker charmed the strippers onto his prop plane and took them to one of the many secluded islands off of Alaska's coast. Once on the island, the man's demeanor changed dramatically. He forced the strippers to get completely naked, pulled out a crossbow, and informed them that they had 20 minutes to hide, at which point he was going to hunt them down and kill them. This man turned from baker to butcher, murdering about 20 girls in this way. Now, to be naked ever in Alaska is already to be inconvenienced. This place is exactly as cold as you think it is. But the most shocking part of this story was that the teller knew the subject. Earl and his mother's bedazzler lived down the road from him. On his way to his old logging job, Earl would get a coffee and a bear claw, almond, not keratin, from this man. "He made the best jelly donuts I've ever tasted," Earl said, in complete and total seriousness. "Tomorrow is the wedding of Jeff, the driver of our vehicle." I was in a car with a bunch of people. Sorry. "Tomorrow is the wedding of Jeff, the driver of our vehicle, and my dear friend April, the shotgun holder. Here I am referring to the term for the front seat of a car. I think we can all agree this warrants clarification. The event has all the trappings of a destination wedding: jet lag, group hikes, a plane ticket for which I could exchange a month's rent. But in fact, our little community of tourists is quite small. 120 out of the 125 guests are native Alaskans. I am one of the other 5, a member of the bridal party. We are a nervous band of outsiders. We are quick to highlight our own ignorance, blurting out things like, "I don't know how to play ice hockey," when someone points out a pond. We think if we surrender our pride early, the state will have mercy on us. The paranoia about wildlife is frankly a whole other animal. See, is that a wolf? I thought I just saw a wolf. Oh wait, that's a dog, and it's moving. I think that's a long dog. Because Canada, the Great White North, is actually a very dark place, when our plane descended through the clouds, it was like landing in a secret city. I had the same feeling the first time I flew to England. After hours of ocean, I experienced an awe at the reality of the world. To have so much nothing and then something, when you are a novice traveler, London feels like Papua New Guinea. For the first time, I understood why people come back from Alaska with 50 pictures of glaciers, or return from a honeymoon in Tahiti with 50 pictures of the same sunset. The world is so beautiful in these places, it is impossible to register that there will be more, more, more. Surely this is it. You negotiate with your ailing camera battery. How can it not stay alive for this? How can you believe that 20 minutes from now there will be an even taller forest and an even wider waterfall? We are only as good as our most extreme experiences. When the bridal party arrived, we were less of a party and more of a bunch of separate people flying in from different locations. April insisted on making trip after trip to retrieve us from the airport. This gesture seems saintly by New York standards until I realized that it's generally warmer in one's car than anywhere else, and there's no real traffic in Anchorage. Even if there was, I wouldn't have minded. The Anchorage airport is a pleasant place to visit. While you can't eat off the floor, you can drop your scarf on it without hesitating to wrap it back around your neck, which is more than I can say for JFK. Plus, the Anchorage airport has a gift shop called Miscellaneous, and a fiber optic starry night at the baggage claim ceiling, which one finds particularly hypnotic after a long flight. As I came down one of the escalators, there was a person in a polar bear plushie suit wearing a Native American headdress on top and handing out flyers. As he wordlessly pointed me towards the exit, I thought, where is David Lynch when you need him? I was the last to arrive. When April and I walked through her front door, there were clear signs that merriment had gone on without me. Around her condo were scattered open greeting cards with miniature dresses glued to the covers, wine-stained glasses, and slicks of soft cheese on a plate in the sink. Everyone was asleep and all the beds were already claimed, so April showed me to my room, a cot in the laundry room with a sleeping bag unfurled on top. Then she reemerged with a second sleeping bag. "Oh, I already have one," I pointed to the cot. "I know," she also pointed to the cot. A frigid blast came through a crack in the window and knocked the paper brides on their faces. It is the next morning, and Jeff has graciously agreed to spend his last day of bachelordom driving his fiancée and 5 of her girlfriends down the coast. Part of me thinks this is the least he can do, all of us having flown past Canada to get here. This is a common observation among our group, a default fascination triggered by the sight of one's breath. Dude, we're above Canada. The state of Alaska itself is like one big whale. Chunks of ice the size of Rhode Island exist like barnacles. They could detach from a glacier up north and no one would notice. During my time there, no fewer than 3 people explained to me that if you took the outline of Alaska and superimposed it on the continental United States, it would stretch across the country end to end. They must teach this in elementary school up there because it had the same delivery I like to employ for, well, you know, yellow is a primary color and a tomato is actually a fruit. It makes sense to imagine Alaska this way, as a giant sheet of shadow pulled over our cities and hills. It is a dwarfing place. It manages to be both roughly lumbering and quietly graceful, light about 20 hours a day, and yet dark on the ground. Every mountain passed is so imposing, it would be the mountain if transplanted south. What I see from across a gas station on a dirt road would be the main attraction in, I don't know, Missouri. In a less tangible way, I feel I am in Alaska at a very fragile time. I arrived at the Ted Stevens Airport 1 week after the senator has been ousted from the office for accepting illegal campaign donations. Meanwhile, banners line the paved streets of Alaska announcing that the following year is the state's 50th anniversary. I feel the way the Italians and Chinese must feel when we point to the Liberty Bell and say, "Look at this old thing we built. We are pleased with it." At one point, April's mother notes that there is something in the air these days besides the usual, just more air. In addition to the mysteriously high number of bear attacks this summer, there are rumors that Alaska's otherwise unknown governor is on the short list for the Republican vice presidential ticket. She refers to this woman as our Sarah Palin, which strikes me as pleasantly loyal. Our Sarah Palin. Perhaps it reveals a political passivity on my part, but I don't think of any of New York's politicians as mine, not in the our little Mikey's all grown up kind of way. Then again, I wouldn't elect a child to office, and perhaps that's the way it should be. Their feet flail around when they sit, and they have a tendency to stick gum underneath the desks. Palin's nomination will serve as a strange social call to arms among the Alaskans I know living in New York, like the way one twin can sometimes feel the pain of another from miles away. Except in this case, one of the twins considers the other an embarrassment, the worst Alaskan PR tragedy since Jewel started publishing poetry. Or, as even Earl put it, quote, that time that moron walked into the woods to die in a bus. Each time Palin winks at the world, one of my Alaskan friends feels a deep pang of shame. But like the rest of the country, right now I know nothing about Sarah Palin. For now I think, good for Sarah Palin, good for April's mom, good for Alaska. Politicians are like Olympians. Every 4 years they bloom into the American consciousness, but they've been there this whole time, putting down roots beneath the surface. This is the last section I'll read. I met April when she was spending her postgraduate years in New York, where I was spending mine as well. April was raised in a city where the fog has been known to freeze and fall on people's heads. A city where the swank downtown neighborhood is dubbed SoNo, south of Nordstrom. When she was ready for something a bit more fast-paced in SoCa, south of Canada, New York was her first choice. We exchanged a few sideways glances during a healthcare benefits orientation at work. Then we went around the conference table sharing arbitrary facts about ourselves on command. I divulged that I had never been stung by a bee. April said she was from Alaska. Alaska, the human resources lady brightened. Hey now. I'm sure New York will seem like Jamaica to you. April gritted her teeth and let out a fake laugh, the kind where one pronounces the word ha. The assumption of dramatic regional evolution is one of humanity's odder ticks. I, for example, do not listen to every schizophrenic hobo muttering to himself on the subway or cover my ears when the train comes, but must I be diagnosed by the rest of the country as legally deaf? How many times has it been suggested that I will actually have difficulty falling asleep in someone's peaceful country home? People of Central Africa, I beg you, never come here unless you are willing to sit in a locked sauna and have some bozo say the words, I bet this feels like air conditioning to you. It's a little infuriating, April admitted, as we sat on the metal benches of a corporate office park and ate our salad bar lunches. It's like they want to take away my socks and dunk me in ice water. I never realized how little people knew about Alaska. Perhaps to appear more knowledgeable than the human resources lady, I told April the only thing I knew about Alaska. It was an old news story about some Anchorage kids who decided to sneak into the zoo's polar bear exhibit and swim across the moat. Alaska may have a free-for-all Noah's Ark quality when it comes to puffins, but a polar bear is still a big deal. Those they lock up. The tragedy was amplified each time I heard it. In one version, one of the kids was being mauled and crying for help, and the other two jumped back into the moat. Sometimes only one of the boys swam back. Sometimes none of them swam back. Sometimes they were all found, floating in red water. It took on the quality of a morality play, undercut with Darwinian themes of stupidity. April rested her plastic fork on her salad bowl, and in the same tone Earl would employ when discussing jelly donuts years later, she said, I had homeroom with those boys. Oh my God. No, she put her hand on my knee. I'm kidding. Oh, I said, phew. Actually, she laughed again. I'm not. But I wanted to get that look off your face. We quickly made the transition from amicable coworkers to voluntary friends. Eventually, we moved a building away from each other on the same block in Manhattan. It was like a Broadway musical, if only in set design. Our apartments faced the same inaccessible courtyard, and a typical phone conversation might go something like, April, hey, it's me, do you smell that? Me, no, smell what? April, I think something's burning. Me, I think it's barbecue. Okay, good, just checking. Most people have at least one friend in New York who never gives up their crusade to make their lives feel rural, and April was mine. We all have elements of self-comfort in the beginning, means of making ourselves feel more civilized. But gradually, the city fights back like crabgrass. Not that you know what crabgrass looks like anymore. You stop setting your alarm clock and start vowing to run only when chased. You make peace with those cracks and corners of your apartment that came ground to the floorboards with dirt. You tack up articles about museum exhibits, only to tear them down months later when you realize the show has moved to Moscow. The diligent Sheen wears off your book club until it's more of a wine club, until it's not even in someone's apartment anymore, until it's just drinks and a movie and enough last-minute cancellation emails to, quite ironically, fill a book. But April really went to the museums and the book clubs and the black and white movies in the park. She painted her walls and stripped her floors and drilled nails into the exposed brick. From these, she hung matted photos of Alaska so green you got the sense the air quality was better in the space around the frame. Photos that looked like they were shot for the very purpose of selling picture frames. Whose mountains are so lush, whose nieces so perfect and healthy? Perhaps those related to a woman who would regularly go into bodegas and inquire about the freshness of the clementines on display outside. She read in Time Out New York that it was possible to go down to a pier in Chelsea and go kayaking in the Hudson. As if this weren't miraculous enough, she actually succeeded in getting me to do this with her, with the caveat that she would inoculate me with Purell beforehand and pay for a Turkish masseuse to scrub me down with steel wool if we capsized. While I eyed the slick rainbow bubbles on the water's surface, she let her paddle rest on her lap and tilted her face up toward the sun. When she opened her eyes again, she said, "How much further do you think we could paddle out?" The time we drove upstate to visit the small artsy town of Beacon, she seemed disappointed that it only took 2 hours to get there. She had rented a Jeep. So sad. We ate French onion soup at a diner with cake plates on the counter, and as we cleaned the cheese from the side of the bowl with our fingers, I asked April if there was anything she didn't love about this home of hers. She thought for a while. She was dismissive of Juneau and Fairbanks. She mentioned the people there wearing Carhartts all year round. When I said, "What are Carhartts?" I was told with an exasperated expression, "They're very Fairbanks." As the day wound down, we ducked in and out of the crafts and antiques shops in the rainy Rockwell-esque streets, and April picked out a set of hand-painted mugs. "Look at this one." She held out a yellow striped mug by its handle. A three-dimensional porcelain bee was stuck to the rim. "When are you going to use that in real life?" I asked her. "I just installed mug hooks in my kitchen," she replied, as if it were the most obvious answer in the world. And she sidled up to the antique cash register. "This is real life." Thank you.
So now we're going to ask Dan Menaker to come join her. Dan, the distinguished editor.
Well, that's very funny. Is this on? Should it be? Turn it off? Okay. Now, yeah. Thank you for coming. It would be, it sort of looks like an Alaskan crowd in that it's few people and a lot of acreage, but I'm very very grateful to you for coming and very grateful to Sloane. As John said, this book, which is the one that I think we'll concentrate on since it's the newest one, is Lisbon and Alaska and Paris. And so it's almost as if you chose places chose places to write about where you would be an outsider, where you were an outsider. And there are other aspects of this whole book and of your other work that make me feel, since this is putatively about point of view, that at least your writing persona is one of someone to whom things happen and who finds herself sort of out of place. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah. I mean, It does. I don't think, I had different reasons. This is decent distance. I had different reasons for going to all those places, so it wasn't like I made a list. I think if that were my intention, they would be far more exotic. I mean, what's funny is that I think you tend to need themes for almost marketing purposes for essay collections, and so because this one happened to involve some foreign countries, it ended up being sort of about travel, but in a way they're not that exotic. But these things do happen. I don't know. I mean, I think if you plugged in like this would only happen to you or only me or something like that into like Twitter and press search, you'd probably find everyone has that moment where they're like, of course, like naturally. I think that the trick is to find out, to just choose the things to write about that you feel like might have been untapped until that moment, maybe.
Let me see if I can ask it a different way. Do you feel, I mean, again, this is, our overarching theme here is point of view. Do you feel that the voice in this the piece you read and the other pieces in the book and the other pieces in the first book, do you feel any distance between that voice and what you consider to be yourself?
Not a huge amount. I think I feel the distance that is, it just happens, it's sort of a de facto or necessitating distance by simply writing something. You know, you're instantly, the second you change the names, the second, you know, I mean, fiction it's probably more true, but there is a distance, but I hear people talk about sort of their writing persona, especially if they fancy themselves humorous or catalog that way, you know, your entire life is not going to be every beat like that. Like now, for instance. Would be a good example.
Well, until just then.
Until just then.
Until
you feel a dip, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I've gone on autopilot.
Gotta save that one.
Exactly. But yeah, so I think that there is definitely a distance that I feel. I don't think it's not so extreme that I'm intentionally hurling myself into situations where I'm going to have to sort of turn on some sort of humor gene. But so I think it's a little bit closer than most.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you have a sort of lineage of writers before you that you think you might be in line?
Worshipful?
In line? No, not necessarily worshipful, but just sort of people who have written in a certain kind of way on whose shoulders you stand. Most of us have that. Most writers have that.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think that what's weird about it is you know, under the, I'll name them with the caveat that I don't think that I'm like them. It's more I'm on their shoulders rather than like up
You're
their
not
shirts.
in bed with them. You're just standing on their shoulders.
Dorothy Parker certainly would be a huge one. David Sedaris. David Rykoff was, I think, maybe the funniest human being I've ever met. And then, or honestly, George Saunders is great. But weirdly, I didn't read too much nonfiction. I mean, I read Joan Didion.
How about Nora Ephron?
Nora I love. I think that she has, she pulled off a very neat trick that I don't know if I'm ever going to be successful at, but I hope that I'm in a position to be successful at it, and that is the trick of having this incredible, very comfortable, very sort of rich life in every respect, and being able to sort of talk the reader out of the fact that she had that.
Right.
You know, and this is Don't You Just Hate It When,
Right.
but the Don't You Just Hate It When was when, like, your
Or
$400 hairdresser gets your...
I feel bad about my neck.
I feel bad about my neck, right. And yeah. I love her writing. I've read everything she's ever written. Heartburn is one of the funniest books. But I don't necessarily see myself in her.
Right. It's just the humorous essayist seems to me, I don't know many, I'm just thinking about the tradition, and it might exclude Twain and a few other people. I don't know many people who write about their lives in a funny way without almost necessarily being self-effacing or self-deprecating. I'm trying to think of an example of where that's not the case, and I can't think of any.
Where they're humor plus self-deprecation as opposed to humor plus like bravado or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
I mean, I think you get that a little bit with Augustin Burroughs.
Right.
It's a little bit like that. But there's usually some trick to it. Like he has an essay where he goes and he tours the cottages of Newport, and he becomes convinced that this is where he was meant to live.
Right.
And he again and again, it's like, the world will realize how special I am. The world will realize that this is what was meant for me and me alone. There's no one else in the world. It's like he skipped one of the developmental steps, except for the fact that he's about 11 when he's thinking this.
Right.
So you forgive him everything.
The clown thing in Portugal, where it seemed to me that if it hadn't been for the alcohol, maybe you felt even more out of place than in Alaska or anywhere else. Did I not follow something? What happened? Did you actually see the clown rehearsal class? Is it in the piece? I forget.
It's not in the piece because it actually turned out to be kind of boring. But I did see the clown rehearsal process. They convinced me to go see them.
Okay, and a
Like
clown
down the road.
Okay, so that means that the clown rehearsal thing was more boring.
Clowns were boring. The clowns weren't as funny.
were boring.
As drunk clowns just in a bar are much funnier than clowns doing what they're meant to do. Clowns are scary in general. So.
They are. In this book, as opposed to the first one, there's a strong sort of theme of bathrooms and functions, shall we say. Has anyone talked to you about that? The physical functionality of this book?
No, but I have to tell you a quick side story though, which is that
You were in the bathroom here.
that's definitely not but I was fortunate to have the opportunity to interview Joan Didion on stage at the library about 6 months ago, and panicked, like read everything she's ever written and discovered that in 3 different spots, 2 in fiction and 1 in nonfiction, she has either 2 characters or herself who cannot operate an air conditioning unit. And it seemed like the kind of thing, and I remember reading it, I'm like, wow, that's a strange sort of unconscious trend for her. Anyway, it is unconscious.
Did you point it out to her?
Yes.
What did she say?
She said, I'm always cold and I don't know what to do. It was a sort of shut down question. She's not very chatty.
No, she doesn't seem to be chatty.
But I think she bleeds it all out on the page. But yeah, so I guess I do have a thing for a bathroom. What's not in either of the books, and which is kind of weird, is for like a school project once, I was at Columbia briefly, and I decided I was taking an anthropology class, and I decided I wanted to stand in the bathrooms of women's rooms from go to like Bendel's and then go to like a Burger King and Hollis, and like see if like behaviorally women behave differently in the bathrooms.
And?
No one washes their hands. No one, especially rich people though. But yes, I'm a little fascinated with it, just because it's something we pretend doesn't. I'm fascinated with any bodily function that we pretend doesn't happen.
That's what you say in the book, and I think it's completely fascinating, not so much because I hope by now I've outgrown my poor toilet training and I'm not obsessed with the subject, but because, I mean, there's a lot of, as I say, functionality. There's the bathroom, there's that, what you just said, I think it's in the book where you say, we do these things and then we sort of go out and make believe that that there's nothing
You
unusual or
pee
strange.
next to your boss, and then you go into a meeting with them.
Right. I've always found that strange too. But what I find is sort of equal. I mean, it's striking how we wear clothes. I mean, there are things that writers sort of see as weird that maybe other people don't, or maybe everybody does, and maybe that's why they respond to such observations. But what's particularly interesting here to me is that there's these kinds of intimate details, and not obsessive, but there's a theme, and then there's this distance at the same time that you feel like the back of the truck piece, for instance. I mean, you strike up it's like there's some lens that keeps switching from very close up and kind of like dead pets and, things that are sort of right in your face, and then outsiderism. I'm talking too much. Do you know what I mean at all?
Yes, I'm just like, I feel like I should be in therapy now.
No, not at all. I mean, we all should be, but I mean, besides that, there's this strange double focus, and I just wonder if that has to do with being a writer in general.
I think that
That both
it's a
that you're
mix.
very observant on the one hand, but in order to do what you do, you have to pull back a little bit.
yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, if you think of it as a camera lens focusing,
Yeah.
I think some of it is proactive and some of it's reactive. I'll start backwards. I think that the reactive stuff comes from, frankly, just the paranoia of writing about yourself and thinking, I've gone for a reference, and okay, like let's say I reference like cherry frosted Pop-Tarts or something, or like Jello 1-2-3 was like a product I had when I was a kid, and I'm like, no one's gonna know what that is. It was on the market for 5 seconds. It just is not a universal reference, and I'm just gonna know and be confident that the context is strong enough that it doesn't matter, and it's a
Right.
little gift for the people who get it. I think that happens in art, in film, dance, in everything. And then if you're feeling a little insecure, a little shaky, and maybe that's so that maybe what you're seeing is actually weak spots in the writing where you're feeling kind of weird about it, you're like, okay, I need to figure out how to apply this to everybody, and then you go back.
Right.
If that makes sense.
It does, and I think, and it's particularly in you mentioned David Rakoff and David Sedaris, and I think, and not so much Dorothy Parker, if I remember correctly, but both of those writers do the same, seems to me, have the same dance between being sort of self-effacing and detached, and then being very almost confessional. So you feel this funny double focus, although that's what makes it funny.
Well, David Rakoff is amazing because he does, and actually Sedaris does the same thing. And what's funny is people read Sedaris specifically, and they think that they would be friends with him. And I'm like, are you reading this?
That's it. That's it.
Because there's the stuck in the middle with you quality, which is, but if you, or Rakoff is the same thing where he'll say, he has this amazing essay on Rent, the musical, and it's amazing. It's just this teardown of it, but it's so well done where it's just because he's earned the right to whip out the knives when he whips them out, and that's sort of the goal, is to dance, this sort of tap dance routine and then stop on a note. So he'll this hilarious riff about Rent, and then he says, like at the end of the paragraph, he's like, for instance, in real life, AIDS is a global pandemic, and in Rent, it's something that makes you cute.
Right. It's like all the people who object to the cutification of breast cancer, too. I mean, there's a whole movement about objecting to that.
Right, enough with the graphic novels about breast cancer.
Yeah. David, I actually wrote a little something about him for the Southampton Review, which is part of one of the siblings of this program. And it's funny because it comes up again. I thought that there's this weird accordionism of humor writing. I've done, I guess, some of it myself, where you sort of, especially in personal essays, where you basically make fun of yourself, and as you just said, you invite the reader to identify with you, and sometimes readers think they know you, and then you sort of, again, not to overemphasize this, you pull back. I mean, you don't, it's almost like acting. I mean, to take it to the extreme, there are stalkers who will believe, as in the Robert De Niro movie, that that you are them. Has that happened to you?
Not like Fear.
No?
Is that what you're thinking?
I guess so.
Or Cape Fear? What is it?
No. There's a movie that Robert De Niro was in where he plays a fan. Maybe it's called The Fan.
Is it called The Fan?
The Fan, yeah.
Okay. I didn't.
Is anyone,
That's inviting criticism, isn't it? that movie?
Until tonight,
Title.
have you had no stalker? I mean,
Yeah, there was a guy in San Diego that sent me some VHS tapes and things. Luckily for him, I have a VHS machine in my house.
Well, no, unluckily for you, you have.
No, I mean, what are the chances? And yeah, well, the thing is, it's maybe it's that gap that you're talking about that you want to fill in. I mean, I feel that way too. It's not stalking. It's what it is I feel it with like Lori Moore. Lori Moore is infamous for making you feel like you know her in her writing, even though it's fiction, but making you feel like you know her, and then keeping you
Absolutely.
at this cold distance.
That's right.
Which is, hers is so sharp to me. Like I think with humor, it sort of blends in. It's part of the punchline. For hers, it's actually very chilling. But I worship her, and all you want to do is like be the one who curls up with her. So what's weird is that I think people think that they're relating to what's there, and I think they're actually relating to what's not there.
Right. I would dispute it a little bit to say that Lori Moore is a wonderful example of this whole phenomenon, this whole question. But I think ultimately she's so sharp and observant in her writing that even if you think she knows you and she's saying what you were thinking but didn't realize it, and that she's making fun, she's calling Sauvignon Blanc SB, and you say, oh yes, of course, I can never drink Sauvignon Blanc again without calling it SB. But I think in her writing at the deepest level, there's a kind of don't enter here because she's so sharp.
Well, people also want so much. I mean, a good, when you're writing nonfiction, there's this inverted thing that happens, and Laurie's an exception. So Laurie's a good example for that, but a bad example for this, which is that people want more from you.
Yes.
Which is strange. I mean, honestly, I'm delighted that people buy it and read it, but then when people want more, and you're like, but I just.
Speaking of wanting more, let's talk about your parents as they're
This is therapy.
as they're represented in the book. I'm not, you're not lying down on a couch with your back to me. I have this feeling about your parents as characters in these pieces, not as real people in the world. That your mother, they're sort of polar opposites in some ways. That the mother in these pieces is one way, and the father is somewhat distanced and ironic and kind of not remote exactly, but set apart. Is that not correct of your life? But am I reading your piece? Yeah.
There's sort of
like with the pets.
Right,
the pets are a good example.
The pets is a good example. I forgot that was in this book. It's sort of, yeah. I mean, there's very little of them actually in the first book. There's more of them in this one. He is more detail oriented and sort of fastidious and perhaps oppressively so. And she is a little bit more flighty and a little bit more like she told me. I was like looking through, this is in the first book, I was looking through her jewelry box when I was 16 and found like an extra wedding ring. I'm like, that's weird. Why do you keep a backup? And she's like, oh, from my first husband. I'm like, that's a piece of information that's really good to know. So that's my mom. And, accompanied by, you knew that. But you have to make them slightly exaggerated. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have to, and this isn't, in the first book, there's the most exaggerated essay I ever wrote was one about a dinner party I had where I invited 4 old friends over. I was trying to reconnect with them. They were from college. And after they were gone, there was a tiny little turd on my floor, which harkens back to your, I'm sorry, it just was there. I didn't manifest it by being obsessed with poop. It was just there. And these 4 people, like nobody would do that, and yet I had to make it possible that 4 people would have possibly done that. So 2 of my friends who are kind of like, 2 of my friends who are like kind of wacky hippies, I made like they were rolling around in the dirt all day, and I called the girl in it beforehand to let her know about the essay. And I was like, just so you know, I'm making you and the guy, like, it's like you're eating burritos and running around on the beach with, like, bandanas on your head. And she was like, okay, that's cool. I can't talk right now. I'm gonna go swimming with manatees. I'm like, you know what? I don't even apologize. I'm not sorry. Forget it. So they're all this is a long-winded way of simply saying that these are my parents, and so those are qualities that are distilled from reality.
I just have this feeling that if, was this not, really?
Is it red?
It's red, it's orange. Well, you could call it red. What do you think, it's red or it's orange?
It's more of an orange, but it's definitely
on.
on.
Hey, whoa. Have you ever had feedback like that from your character? Yeah, that's one of those things where you go, ha, I know, go ahead. Like from the people that you've represented, anyone ever get mad? Without being, you don't have to be specific, obviously, but.
No, it's fine. I don't mind. The good thing is people have gotten mad, and they've gotten mad. Yeah, no, mine's not. Yeah, it's like contagious. It's like yawning. There's.
Do you know why people yawn? You said it's like yawning.
No, I
it's
figured
contagious.
I read an article about why deja vu exists, but I don't want to spoil it to you. Why do people yawn?
No, then you'll tell me that. People yawn to cool their brains.
Excuse
They
me?
do not yawn to get more oxygen. That's what I read in some nature thing or something. What's the deja vu?
It's going to be upsetting because I'm sure everyone likes to believe in deja vu. But you know how you swallow something down like the wrong pipe? Like you apparently can do that where your like optic nerves, like it basically you process the image and instead of going and that's why it always takes the same amount of time because it's like instead of going to the past, it goes through the present, and for a second you feel like it's like a little mixed, and then your brain automatically corrects it. Sorry.
Well, what? I don't. You haven't shattered any terrible. You haven't shattered any
like saying
dreams.
Dreams don't exist.
No,
Okay.
no.
Well,
Not only that, but sometimes when you have deja vu, you can remember the thing after you come to, so to speak. I think there must be a neural stimulus for you to have it, that it is in fact like something else. And maybe the neurological process has made you mistake it for the very
everything's
thing.
in the schema. I mean, I think it's highly unlikely that you
I
will.
think we've had this conversation
We
before.
have had this conversation before, though.
In fact, I know what you're going to say next, but go ahead.
I feel like I can't speak. Totally trapped into silence. Wait, you had asked me a question, though. I forgot. Oh, have I had any people get mad at me?
Yeah.
Because of the duration of the essays, they're mad in proportion. You know what I mean? It's not like I wrote Running with Scissors, for example, and that whole family went out really excited to go,
Right.
I can't, in other words, it's a more like sprained ankles than a broken heart. I mean, in other words, the worst things I've written have taken up just logistically like no more than like 3 pages of real estate. And I've definitely had, let's see, I got disinvited from a wedding. Does that count?
Yeah, that's excellent.
Is that more than you were asking
No,
for?
I'm having a deja vu about some other disinvitation of my own. I don't understand why anyone would. I mean, I asked you the question myself, but I don't understand. I mean, everyone's disguised.
Is this I don't know who's going to hear this, but I'm about to curse. I call a girl's, not in this book, but in the other book, I call a girl's boyfriend who I had no idea that she was going to keep dating him or become unfianced to this person. I call him a fuckface.
A fuckface. Huh. So she was not. She was
Very
a little.
inappropriate for me to be at the wedding. You're supposed to be surrounded by people who believe in that union.
Right. Who is Sky Parrot? Am I missing something? Does this name pop
no
up
one
out
has
of?
asked me that. That is the author photo credit. She's a friend of mine. She runs a magazine called Dossier Magazine, which is sort of fashion, music, art, mostly fashion, straight out of Brooklyn. And she has a ridiculous name, which is very real, so I relate to her.
Huh. It just seemed, I didn't know whether, I had a deja vu that I was in the Pets essay when I saw her name. I thought, wait, where,
No, that's
where am I?
her real name.
Do you miss publishing?
Yeah, I used to work there. I miss it a lot.
Yes, Sloane was a terrific publicist
Oh, thanks.
at Random House, Knopf, I think.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's true.
for some number of years.
10 of them.
10 of them.
Yeah.
Huh.
But yeah, I do miss it a lot, and because it was 10, it was a lot. I'm a real nester. Like you can tell, I think, from even like the last essay is about moving and it's about objects in my apartment.
Right.
You know, somewhere between superficiality and Buddhism is sort of the writing. But like, and so even with work, those people are like family to me. So I miss working with them tremendously. I don't miss meetings
Right.
at all.
I thought Knopf was supposed to have very few meetings.
Oh my gosh, they're interminable.
Yeah.
But I do miss, you know, I think that if you publicists in general get a bad rap in every industry, you know, flack, whatever, it's either an airhead thing or people who aren't equipped to be publicists. And the truth is, if you do it right and you're doing books, you get to change what people read.
Right.
And that I miss.
Well, and you get them to read good things. I mean.
Right, exactly. And I also wasn't, it's not like I was a publicist for like, you know, how to clip your toenails in 10 minutes or less. I mean, it was like, or Pamuk. It wasn't like bad.
Was Pamuk the highlight? Or do you have other things that you worked on that have stayed with you, or people that
I mean, the
writers
people,
you've
in
known?
terms of people of like campaigns I'm proudest, like there's like a trinity where you're like, you love the author. Sometimes it's disappointing, you know, sometimes you love a book and then you meet the author, you know, and
Yeah.
there's
Yeah, no, I do know.
that.
I do know. And I've been that author myself, too. I want to talk.
And you've been and I too have been a disappointment to people, I'm sure. And so,
No, it's not that, but yes, right.
yeah, no, you're like, oh, this a-hole.
Yeah.
No one thinks that about you.
Yeah, yes.
But no, you know, there's a sort of trinity of, okay, a person who's incredibly lovable, incredibly talented, hardworking, and the publicity went well is
That's
rare to get all
Yeah.
those,
The
you know,
trifecta.
that shot aligned. Jim Shepard would be a huge one for me.
Really?
I love Jim so much.
That's
so
interesting.
Much.
I don't know him hardly. I've met him,
Yeah,
but
he's good. Toby Wolf is amazing
yes,
as well.
this is, I
Laurie.
think, a very shared.
Yeah, and Laurie's
thing.
amazing too. Laurie's great. And then, you know, I'm not going to say who the bad ones are, but it was more people who, I mean, I had an author once tell me she refused to go on tour in the South because she thought her hair would frizz. I had authors prank call me. You know, I was James Fry's publicist. That was fun.
I bet. You did a great job, Sloane. I have to.
And I don't work there anymore. I got fired. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, so it was more. But it is interesting to see how they sort of function in the real world because they're not meant to, authors.
You talked about nesting, and there's a lot about apartments, and I would suggest to you that you're sort of with the stuff about your family, the stuff about the pets, the stuff about the travel and so on, that it's almost like the boll weevil looking for a home. So now, if you know that song, so now you're kind of freelancing, I think. I mean, you're living a life of improvisation. Does that make you uncomfortable? I mean, do you wish you had occupationally or from month to month or year to year a steady
I
vocation?
Come from, it's not like my dad worked for Con Ed for a million years, but he, you know, I come from the baby boomers.
Right.
And these are people who
Their model
get a
is
job.
you
Yeah,
get a
like
job and you do the job.
Yeah, get and no assistance obviously, and like get it, you know, just go. And I did that. And you know, it's sort of ludicrous given my background. It's like it sounds like an Onion headline, like nice Jewish girl from Westchester quits job for no health insurance. Like, it's just crazy. Like, you know, so there is a madness to it, and it's scary. Not every day, but maybe every other day.
Do you know what you'll be doing, let's say in June of
No.
2013?
Vaguely.
Are you working on a book?
Yeah.
Another book of essays?
Yes.
Uh-huh. And
You're right.
I'm sorry, I can't
No,
help
it's
being
good.
as smart as I am. I somehow just knew.
But a novel as well.
Oh, a novel too. So you don't. So come June, I mean, you're living kind of week to week, month to month. If Stony Brook calls you and says, would you do an interview, you may say yes, and that's the way it is.
Yes, although apparently it was hard to get the first three times, but
right.
two natural disasters got in the way.
That's
so
true.
That wasn't totally my fault.
So the last thing I'm going to ask you, and then maybe people out there would like to ask you, is about, which I already know the answer, but you just referred to yourself as a nice Jewish girl from Westchester. So tell us again, tell us again, and those who don't know, why your name is Sloane Crosley, which is like, something out of Fitzgerald or something.
I know. Sloane, my first name, my mother could not think of a name for me, and she was watching a movie while pregnant with me. This actually goes into your other, I think my dad, if it was only his responsibility, would have had charts and figured out what was the most logical, and they would have been 3D and made of plexiglass charts to figure out the name, like a Rube Goldberg contraption. But my mother was watching I'm sure you've seen the Charlton Heston movie, Diamond Head. Why would you have? It's terrible. It is about the downfall of the pineapple industry in Hawaii.
Right. No,
It's really good.
It's
But
very dramatic.
It's about all these racial sort of conflicts in Hawaii at the time, and there was a French actress named, this gorgeous blonde actress named Yvette Mimieux.
Yeah.
I get the feeling she was the Mandy Moore of her time. I don't know. No one knows. She's whatever. But,
She's of my generation. I very well know
Oh, okay.
Yvette Mimieux.
So Yvette
For sure.
Mimieux.
Yeah. But Yvette
plays
and
a woman
Mimieux
named.
go ahead.
Oh, she
yeah.
plays. Oh, her character in the movie is Sloane.
Sloane.
Sloane Howland.
And your last name?
And that's how I got that. So I'm named after Charlton.
Is that
Heston.
an Ellis Island name? Crosley?
No. Kantrowitz.
Cantrew.
was the
Oh,
name.
well, obviously.
And
Kantrowitz, Crosley.
my dad was my grandfather was in an office with a guy who told him he would never make it in business with that name.
Mhm.
And there was a Crosley radio on the desk.
That's great. Only in America.
Right.
Anyone have any questions, please? What a surprise. Magdalene has a question.
We worked in the same building for a period of time. Different elevator bank.
And I did interview Sloane another time for a short-lived online interview series called Title Page, which I've looked at again, and she was great.
Thanks.
Terrible, but she was great.
This one, I was really impressed to see you had a prominent blurb on the best, the adventures in Russian literature, and those who love them, read them, things like that.
Love, yeah.
Are you a big fan of Russian literature?
Not particularly. I mean, I've read what I've had to read. War and Peace was very good. Anna Karenina I've read.
It's okay.
I love the Chekhov short stories. I think that, to me, is my sort of point of entry into Russian literature. And weirdly, that point of entry wasn't even a sort of natural. I mean, Elis has such a love for it, and it's so ingrained in her. And that's why she could write that book, because she just spoke from a place that has this assumption that everybody loves it almost, and it's just it's really personal and lovely. Whereas actually mine came from, I think, in 7th or 8th grade, I read a Raymond Carver short story called Errand about the death of Chekhov, and it's amazing. And it's literally just almost nothing. It's basically Chekhov dies, and they call someone. It's about figuring out what to do in the hotel room where he dies.
I remember that story.
So good. And he drops the cork.
Right.
It's so good. It's so good. And it's got all these quotes. And this is what's weirdly is I think Carver just hit a point where he's like, I can do absolutely anything. And it's got quotes from newspapers of the time. It's an insane looking short story. And it's kind of experimental to my mind. And it really got me into Chekhov that way. And then, but I never really then dove in. And I read the bad translation of The Master and Margarita. Sorry. Sorry, that's the answer to your question.
Fourth question, third question.
Last one. So I was really pleased you asked the question about persona and how close it is. And I was wondering, because I just have been following your tweets a little bit, and I think you're crossing that line I'm much older, so there's a trend in younger writers that
I mean, I do recognize what you're saying. I think Twitter has been amazing for people who are sort of stand-up comedians and stuff like, and giving them that. And I mean, some of them are friends in real life. Some of them are sort of fake, weird, pixelated friends. And I think that so if I play to anything or have a persona at all, sometimes it'll be to that, where, you know, all you want to do, especially all anyone wants to do, you don't have to be a writer, is to have someone to play with, you know, to like push back and let's make the joke funnier and funnier and funnier. And so I do tend to lean towards that a little bit. Otherwise, I don't think of it at all, actually. I don't really see it. I mean, the only thing I kind of see, the only thing that is kind of close to your question is if I'm writing something and it just doesn't fit, you no longer have to like kill your darlings. You can just put them on Twitter. Like, it's like this has nothing to do, and it's like, you know, so you just put this sort of nonsensical sentence out there anyway, and it gets to have this little separate side life for 5 minutes. But otherwise, I don't actually think about it that much.
Sort of like the difference between building something with Lego and throwing Lego.
Right, yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like just playing.
You're just sort of throwing stuff. I mean, it's not, I mean, but that's what's weird, though, is that people are they treat it as a real thing now, which is strange.
Yeah, it's
like,
very
and they become
odd
critical
to me.
of it, or they praise it, or they think so. And I'm like, this is so bizarre to me. It's literally, it's nothing.
That's because you actually sit down and work hard and make whole things, and that's real writing. Anybody else? Yeah, Andrew.
I have two
Hi.
questions. One was you talked about people getting mad at you, and you said, well, it's only 3 pages of real estate, so proportionally to a novel, 3 pages to an essay, that's a lot of real estate. So
Yeah.
So the second part of that question is
That's not a question.
when you got disinvited, did you just call them a fuckface, or did you spend 3 pages on it?
Oh, you know what? That is a good question. No, yeah, I did not spend, well, I would say about 3 pages, yeah. I mean, I think that you know, what's interesting is that I look back on it and I think that I totally deserved it. You know, I definitely deserved to
The
get disinvited.
disinvitation.
Yes.
Well, did he deserve a fuckface?
Yes. I think that he's become a different person from what I know. It's a little bit different. You know, I think when you're writing, it's very difficult to write. I mean, I know you don't necessarily see the through line, but just in terms of someone who I do worship, who is Dorothy Parker, she had a great quote once, which is, humor should always be used as a shield and never as a sword, which is a great trick if you're a genius. And I definitely sort of, you know, purposely, I mean, I read it before they pressed print, like slipped, you know, a bunch of times in here. And I think that it's sort of what I needed to make the piece real. And I don't know if that's right or if it's wrong, but it's, I always tried my sort of litmus test. If I write something that's remotely mean or negative at all, I think, is there something worse I could say that would be true that I'm not saying about that person, that thing, that experience, or whatever it is? And if the answer is no, this is the absolute worst example of everything they've ever done, then I don't include it. And with this particular character, the answer was yes, there are things I could say that I won't. So, yeah.
The second thing is, and this is a request more than a question, but could you please tell everybody that's here how much it made you a better writer that you wrote the magazine?
That I wrote for magazines?
That's what I teach.
Oh, you do? Oh, you're like, could you just sound like I feel like a puppet?
I'm woefully under-enrolled, so I want you to tell everyone
That you make it. It's certainly, well, first of all, it's great to write for a bunch of different ones. It depends on what the magazine is. You certainly learn economy, which is not something, obviously, verbally I'm prone to. But you definitely learn it in writing. You learn how to get to the point and take the training wheels off a little bit.
Actually, you're very strict in your writing. I mean,
Really? Thank
oh
you.
yeah, it's almost severe. I mean, in the best way. No. That's a tremendous for me. I mean, I look at your sentences and I look at your word choices, and they're very economical, actually. I mean, also structurally, as long as we're at it, they are quite brilliant, and I think they're almost. I mean, you start here and then you go back often and recapitulate something, and you come up to the present, and you go a little bit forward, and there's almost. I mean, Alice Munro does this with short stories. So do many other people. I I somehow have this theory that it has to do with movies. That people who write this way have seen a lot of movies. They walk into a theater, something starts in the middle of something. And then it becomes apparent what it is. And then there's another surprise and you find out what happened before, so there's a spatial aspect to your essays. They're not like clotheslines. They're more like a ball of twine. Yeah.
Well,
anyway, but
it's definitely
magazines.
combined with magazines. Well, magazines and movies actually both have that because you need to hook somebody right away.
You need to
So
hook.
maybe
Exactly.
it's actually,
the
again,
hook.
like that, I mean, I'm perfectly happy to be in the company of people who can structure something like Alice Munro, but I think that it might be sort of hedging a little bit to make sure that people are interested right away, that you can entertain them right away.
Right.
Magazines have that more because you're competing with every other article in the magazine.
And advertisements. And
Whereas people have already bought this. I mean, they're already screwed.
right. They're already totally right.
So.
Unless they go onto the street in front of Zabar's and resell, they can do
I've
that.
actually never. I always keep an eye out.
More about magazines. To follow up on Andrew's question, don't you also learn to be pushed around a lot?
And to fight.
Pardon? Pardon?
Depends on how you look at it.
Well, no,
you
but
do. You learn.
it's not. You started with economy, but one of the reasons you have to learn economy is that the person calls and says you have to cut 400 words.
You have to cut 400 words. Yeah, that I've never. Well, I've had that happen a couple of times. But you learn. I guess you learn not to be scared of these. The editors there. I mean, or you learn the personality of different magazines. Different magazines just structurally are very top-heavy, which means that everybody needed a promotion. Everybody's working at Condé Nast. It has nothing to do with you. And
Right.
what this means at the end of the day is that everybody, either because they want to or because they don't want to, it is their God-given right to have their paws on your piece.
Yeah.
Until suddenly you don't recognize it.
Yeah.
And then that's what I mean by you learn to fight. But you don't.
But you also
You
have to
learn
look.
an audience, though, which is nice. I think that's what's important about magazine writing more than a space. You learn who you're talking to and an experiment in what's it going to be like for this kind of person to read it. And then I think that sort of muscle comes into effect a little bit when you're reading and you can't decide if something's good or not anymore, and you pull out a random page and imagine, what is a GQ reader thinking reading this? What is my camp friend thinking this, when they read this?
What is the Playboy reader?
What is the
thinking?
Playboy, whether he's not reading it?
Chances are. No, I think that certainly writing for magazines myself and working in a magazine, I think it's more like a trade and a craft than it is like an art. This is art. And then the interaction with magazines and editors and so on is hammering stuff out. And it's almost negotiating in a way. And, but it's good. But it's good for you.
Learn with the craft is a better way to get to the art. A lot of clarity of expression happens.
I do.
As well.
And many magazine writers who start out doing that and being very good at it, I'm not saying that it's better, but they do happen to go on and write books time after time. And I think it's almost kind of an apprenticeship. You learn to be, when someone's very direct about what they need from you, you kind of internalize that. It's very helpful. It doesn't mean you have to accept it, but a good editor at a magazine with a nonfiction piece can really, make you think, and you will incorporate it or you will not, but it's helpful. I think it's a good thing to write for. I will say, magazines these days, I believe, are different from the way they used to be, but that's geezer talk. And now I think one does feel more like a content provider a little bit than a writer. You're filling a certain kind of space. Anybody else? Yeah.
Back to the fuckface guy. When you're in a dinner party like that with, 5 of your friends and you're in an awkward conversation with someone like that, does it click in like, wow, this could be writing material? And if so, you're like, I got to write down dialogue like in your BlackBerry or write it down. Like, how does that process work?
No, it does. I mean, you're like, that's not a yes/no question. By the way, if I was Joan Didion, I would be like, no. Just so you know how difficult that was.
That's mean.
It's true.
No, I don't mean of you. I mean mean of her.
No, she's lovely.
No, she's
very.
great.
There's not a lot of. You come to her, I think,
Yeah.
which is understandable. But I don't think of it that way. I mean, I do have friendships certainly where like, yeah, now that this is what I do for a living and am, somewhat known for it, there's definitely, oh my God, that person's late to a movie. And then the person next to me will be like, really, why don't you write an essay about it? And I'm like, everyone's very funny, yes. But no, I don't do that. And in terms of dialogue, I mean, here's the thing that I think your question is actually really a question about memory. These are voluntary, you know what I mean? I mean, I think that if you just asked me to write 12 essays and you assign like time periods, you're like, write about freshman year of college, go, and it has to be this. It's not sticking in the same way. So I remember them because I remember what these people said. So it works in reverse kind of. But no, I don't have one eye open for it.
It's like a little bit the way I think about Lena Dunham, I have to say, which is she's another example of, I mean, I think you've far outdone her in some ways, but there is that idea that you feel as if there's a sort of battening or almost predation on one's real life, and it is hard. I mean, writers do tend to remember things, and they do tend to observe and record, and even if they don't do it knowingly, they do it later on, and it comes back and they use it. So
They're also oversensitive, so every little thing
We are
clicks
not.
in.
what are you talking about?
Exactly. So you remember like this like thing that is either a source of elation or like scar tissue.
A very good point. I'm sure we need to, and I just need to ask you one thing that I forgot to ask you. You talk in this book about your spatial orientation problems. First of all, I want you to know that when I was 9 years old, or 10 years old, I thought it was spatial. And that's important, just as I thought a pharmacy was a branch of Macy's that was far away. And I couldn't figure out why there were so many of them in New York. I've brought up here. So now I need to ask you whether you think, first of all, do you still have spatial orientation issues?
Yeah, I don't know anything.
You don't know anything. You walk out and you don't know whether to turn left or right?
No.
That's a true fact, as my son used to say?
Yes.
Okay. And
You saw me. Yeah, she saw it. Yeah.
okay. Do you think that has anything to do with the way you write?
That it's like scattered a little bit?
No, no, not that. I'm trying to go back. I'm trying to make it like a really good analytical session. I'm trying to go back to the first thing we talked about, which was that distance and closeness. That, in other words, there's a disorientation that seems to be, is part of the way your brain works. And I just wonder if in Lisbon and Paris and Alaska, there's some sort of psychological equivalent to feeling literally not sure where you are, out of place or surprised or disoriented.
I think maybe there is. I mean, there's certainly on a very practical level where, in Lisbon, I got lost a lot. I mean,
And you went to the wrong apartment in Paris.
I went to the wrong apartment, but that's
But
not
she
my
gave
fault.
you the wrong address. I know, but it's...
But yeah, no, exactly. But the idea that I wouldn't like self-correct, does lead to some ridiculous. Yeah, sure. I think that does. When you say, "Am I putting myself in?" So it doesn't have. I don't think it has a psychological. It doesn't. I don't think it's that profound. It's not that deep. But I do have. But just on a practical level, these things do happen because. I mean, I've never written about it, but once I, got on the F train in Carroll Gardens, and I guess something like I don't know, buildings wouldn't clue me in. I ended up at Avenue X.
Right.
You know where Avenue X is?
No.
It's like England. It's basically Coney Island.
Right.
Because I just took it the wrong direction, and which is fine. It happens. People get on the train the wrong direction all the time, but then they get off and they go.
Right. They kind of...
And so that is like the kind of thing. And there were things that happened on that train ride, that's sort of, I've always sort of thought about writing about. And would not have happened had the spatial thing not have happened.
Right.
But I don't think it's necessarily like endemic to why I write the way I do.
Right. It makes me, it's one of the few stories that I've ever read that made me more sympathetic to Tina Brown. How is that possible? What do you mean? What are you talking about? Well, I'll tell you, she has that. I never believed it until I read your essay. But now I do. I mean,
She wears a bracelet, so she knows this is
Does
left.
she?
This is left.
oh, see, I didn't even know that.
This is left.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you can't miss that. Anything else? Nope. Okay, well, as we go out, I will point you in the right direction. Thank you. Thank you for finding this place.
No, thank you for having me. Are you kidding?
Great pleasure.
Thank you.